We begin with passengers evacuated from the terminal at Eppley Airfield this morning. Authorities say someone called in a security threat. Those who didn't pass through security were evacuated. Investigators swept the airport. Operations were back to normal about an hour later.
Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen officially filed for re-election today. He announced his intention to seek a second term last year. Republican and Democratic primaries are on May 12th.
President Trump will speak tomorrow afternoon in Clive, Iowa. That's a suburb of Des Moines. White House officials say the speech will focus on energy and the economy. We'll have live coverage from our Iowa Capitol Bureau.
Breaking tonight, officials say Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino and some of his agents are expected to leave Minneapolis as soon as tomorrow. President Trump has said he had a, quote, good call with Governor Tim Walz this morning, adding that he and the governor are on the same wavelength.
Let's be practical, let's be realistic when it comes to our security.
The head of NATO says the alliance needs to up security in the Arctic. This comes after President Trump's push to acquire Greenland.
Nebraska men's basketball now 5th in the country in this week's AP poll. They've never ranked that high. The big game is 24 hours from now when the Huskers take on 3rd-ranked Michigan in Ann Arbor.